They say family is everything. They promise to protect you. But in the House of Sterling, trust was just another word to be twisted and broken. For Alara, home wasn't a sanctuary, it was a cage. A gilded, crumbling cage where she was the keeper of everyone's secrets and the cleaner of everyone's messes. She was the ghost in the hallways, the whisper in the kitchen, the one they all looked right through. Until the day they decided to look at her. And when they finally did, it wasn't with love. It was with a price tag. It was the rain that told her something was wrong. Not the usual gentle Seattle mist, but a hard, driving downpour that beat against the old bay windows of the Sterling mansion, as if demanding to be let in. Ilara's hands were submerged in the soapy water of the kitchen sink, scrubbing at a stubborn grease stain on a pan. The rhythmic motion was her only solace. In here, with the steam and the scent of lemon, she could pretend the world was simple. She could ignore the sounds from the study. Her father's voice, Alaric Sterling, was a low rumble of thunder beneath the rain. Her sister's tones were sharper like shattering glass. Serena, the eldest, was all cold calculation. Mira, the youngest, was pure volatile fire. Ilara couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the sound of a deal being made, a desperate, final deal. A cold dread, sharper than any winter wind, began to coil in her stomach. She pulled her hands from the water, wiping them on her faded apron. Her reflection in the dark window was a pale smudge. At 22, she looked like a faded photograph of the vibrant girls her sisters were. Her hair, a plain brown, was tied back in a simple braid. Her eyes, a soft gray, held a constant shadow of wariness. She was a late bloomer, the pack doctor had said, a polite way of calling her defective. A wolf who couldn't shift was worse than useless in their world. She was a liability, a stain on the Sterling legacy. The study door crashed open. Mira stood there, her perfect features twisted into a triumphant sneer. "There you are. Stop hiding in here and make yourself useful. We need coffee, the good china, now." Ilara nodded, her throat too tight to speak. As she moved to prepare the tray, her hands trembled. The ornate porcelain cups felt like ice. She carried the tray down the hall, the weight of it a familiar burden. The door to the study was ajar. She pushed it open with her hip. The air in the room was too thick to breathe. Her father, Alaric, sat behind his massive oak desk, his face haggard. Serena stood by the fireplace, her posture rigid. And sitting across from them were two men. They weren't from their pack. They wore expensive suits that couldn't hide the brutality in their eyes. They smelled of damp concrete, iron, and violence. Wolves from the Iron Fang pack, their bitter rivals. One of them, a man with a scar splitting his eyebrow, looked up as she entered. His gaze swept over her, slow and assessing, like a butcher weighing a cut of meat. A slow, unpleasant smile touched his lips. "Is this the one?" he asked, his voice a grating rasp. Alaric couldn't meet Ilara's eyes. He stared at the ledger open on his desk, at the columns of red numbers that spelled their ruin. "Yes," he said, the word a dry leaf crumbling from his lips. "That's Ilara." Serena stepped forward, taking the tray from Ilara's numb hands. "Thank you, Ilara. You can go now." But Ilara was rooted to the spot. The air in the room was too thick to breathe. "Father?" she whispered. Alaric finally looked at her. There was no warmth there, no flicker of paternal love, only a cold, hard resolve. "It's for the good of the pack, Ilara. We are restructuring our alliances." The scarred man, whose name she would learn was Kale, chuckled. "A nice way of putting it. Your old man here owes my alpha a mountain of debt, money he doesn't have, but he's got something else of value." Mira, from the doorway, gave a cruel little laugh. "You finally get to be useful, Ilara. You're going to help save us all." The pieces crashed together in Ilara's mind with the force of a tidal wave. The whispered arguments about debt collectors, the missing heirlooms, The way her father had been forcing a bitter herbal tea on her every morning for years, saying it was for her weak constitution. It wasn't medicine. It was a chain. They weren't just forming an alliance. They were selling her. No. The word was a breath, a plea. You can't. It's already done, Alaric said, his voice gaining a sliver of its old authority. The contract is signed. You leave with them tonight. Panic, pure and blinding, exploded in her chest. She turned to run, but Cale was faster. He was out of his chair and blocking the door in a fluid, predatory movement. He grabbed her wrist, his grip like iron. "None of that, little bird," he murmured, his breath hot and foul against her ear. "You're a Sterling. That name still carries weight where you're going. You'll be the pride of the Iron Fang Alpha's collection." Tears of terror and betrayal blurred her vision. She looked past him to her family. Serena was calmly pouring coffee, her face a mask of indifference. Mira watched with bright, excited eyes. Alaric had looked back to his ledger, shutting her out completely. In that moment, something inside Alara didn't just break, it shattered. The last fragile hope for her family's love turned to dust, and in the hollow space it left behind, a new sensation began to stir. A deep, resonant heat pulsed once, twice, in the very core of her being. It was buried under layers of poison and neglect, but it was there, a sleeping giant beginning to stir. Cale dragged her from the room. As the heavy door of the Sterling mansion closed behind her for the last time, sealing her into the cold, rainy night, Alara made a silent vow. They thought they were discarding their shame. They thought they were handing over a broken thing. But they had just unleashed a storm they could never hope to control. The world outside the car window was a smear of neon and shadow. Seattle's glittering heart gave way to its grim industrial underbelly. The sleek car carrying Alara away from everything she knew plunged into a district of warehouses and chain-link fences where the rain smelled of oil and rust. She sat in the back, flanked by Cale and another silent, hulking guard. They hadn't tied her hands, a small mercy that felt like a taunt. Where could she run? Into a territory controlled by the wolves who now owned her? The bonds of pack law were absolute. By signing that contract, her father had legally transferred her allegiance. She was no longer a Sterling of Silver Creek. She was property of the Iron Fang. The car stopped before a massive, windless building of stained concrete. A single steel door slid open with a grinding shriek. The scent that washed out was overwhelming. Sweat, blood, damp fur, and the sharp, coppery tang of dominance. This was no proud pack house. This was a compound, a fortress. Cale dragged her from the room. "Welcome to your new home, Sterling. Try to make it last." The interior was a cavernous space, part barracks, part dungeon. Rough-looking men and a few hardened women paused in their activities to watch her stumble in. Their eyes held no pity, only cold curiosity or open contempt. She was the enemy's daughter, bought and paid for, a trophy. She was taken down a narrow, dimly lit corridor to a small room. It wasn't a cell, not exactly. It had a narrow cot, a bare sink, and a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. But the door was thick steel, and when it clanged shut behind her, the finality of the sound echoed in her bones. This was it. This was her life now. Days bled into a monotonous, terrifying routine. She was not mistreated, not physically. She was fed bland food. She was given clean, simple clothes. But she was watched, always watched. And she was kept separate, a solitary creature in a den of predators. She learned that the Iron Fang Alpha, a brute named Vorlin, was away on business. Her fate awaited his return. The isolation was a weapon. It gave her time to think, and thinking was dangerous. It fed the cold fury that was slowly replacing her shock. She thought of her father's averted gaze, of Serena's cool dismissal, of Mira's glee. The heat in her chest, that strange new sensation, flickered in response to her anger, a low ember fighting to become a flame. One afternoon, a week into her captivity, a different kind of wolf entered her room. An older woman named Hilda, with eyes the color of flint and hands scarred from a lifetime of labor. She was the compound's cook and apparently now Alara's keeper. "Come," Hilda said, her voice devoid of warmth. "You will work. Idle hands are a danger here." Alara was put to work in the vast, steaming kitchen, peeling mountains of potatoes and scrubbing pots. It was a cruel mirror of her old life, but here there was no pretense of family. Here she was simply a slave. Hilda watched her with an unreadable expression. As the days passed, she began to speak in short, gruff sentences. "You are not what they said you would be," she muttered one day while Alara chopped vegetables. "What did they say I would be?" Alara asked, her voice barely above a whisper from lack of use. "A spoiled sterling princess, weak, useless, a broken thing." Hilda's sharp eyes scanned her face. "But you work without complaint. You have a stillness in you, not weakness, waiting." The observation startled Alara. No one had ever looked at her and seen anything but a lack. "What am I waiting for?" Hilda just shook her head and turned back to the stove. The storm always comes for those who wait long enough. That night, alone in her room, Alara pressed her hands to her chest. The heat was stronger now, a steady pulse beneath her ribs. It felt like a second heartbeat. The bitter tea her father had forced on her, it had been a suppressant, a cage for whatever was inside her. Away from its poison, her body was slowly, painfully breaking free. She didn't know what was happening to her. She only knew that the numbness was gone. In its place was a crystalline clarity and a resolve as hard as the concrete walls around her. She would not be Vorlin's prize. She would not live and die in this gray hell. The Sterling family had sold her to save themselves. She would use that very transaction to break every chain they'd ever placed on her. The first step was to see her enemy. She needed to see Vorlin. The announcement came like a tremor through the compound. Alpha Vorlin had returned. The atmosphere, already tense, became electric with a mix of fear and fervent loyalty. The pack gathered in the main hall that evening, a sea of rough faces turned toward a raised concrete platform. Alara was made to attend. Hilda positioned her at the very back, near the kitchen entrance, a silent shadow. "Keep your eyes down," the older woman hissed. "Do not attract his attention, not yet." But Alara had to look. She had to see the man who thought he owned her. When Vorlin entered, the room fell into an instant, absolute silence. He was a mountain of a man, taller and broader than any wolf she had ever seen. His dark hair was shorn close to his skull, and a network of scars mapped a history of violence across his face and thick neck. He wore his power not like a king, but like a weapon, crude and undisguised. His eyes, a pale, icy blue, scanned his followers, and where his gaze landed, wolves flinched or straightened with pride. This was not an alpha who led, he dominated. His lieutenant, Kale, stepped forward and murmured in his ear, gesturing toward the back of the room. Vorlin's glacial gaze swept over the crowd and locked onto Alara. Time seemed to slow. The crowd parted silently, creating a direct path between the alpha and his acquisition. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped behind bone. The instinct to look down, to submit, was overwhelming, but the new heat in her chest flared, a defiant spark. She forced her chin up. She met his eyes. A ripple of shock went through the pack. No one looked directly at Vorlin without permission. A slow, unpleasant smile spread across his face. He began to walk toward her, each heavy footfall echoing in the silent hall. He stopped a few feet away, so close she could smell the leather of his jacket and the cold metallic scent of his dominance. He looked her up and down, his expression of detached appraisal, like a man inspecting a new tool. "The sterling runt," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the floor. "You're smaller than I expected, pale. They say you have no wolf." Alara said nothing. Her throat was sealed shut. "No matter," Convorlin continued, reaching out a massive hand. He didn't touch her face as Kale had. Instead, he pinched the simple fabric of her sleeve between his thumb and forefinger, rubbing it as if testing the quality. "The blood is what matters. Sterling blood will strengthen my line. You will serve your purpose." The dehumanization in his words, the absolute certainty of her fate, should have shattered her. But it had the opposite effect. It crystallized her resolve. This man saw her as a vessel, a genetic resource. He did not see her at all. In that moment, a strange calm settled over Alara. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now ringed by a fortress of icy anger. She looked past Vorlin's shoulder, not at him, but through him. She didn't see the terrifying alpha of the Iron Fang. She saw the final obstacle, the last lock on her cage. Her silence seemed to amuse him. "Defiant," he mused. "Good. I enjoy breaking in spirited things. It makes the yielding sweeter." He turned to Kale. "Prepare her. The claiming ceremony will be at the full moon." As Vorlin turned and strode back to the platform, the spell broke. The pack's chatter resumed, louder now, punctuated by glances thrown her way, some pitying, most gloating. Hilda's firm hand grasped her elbow and pulled her back into the relative safety of the kitchen corridor. Back in her room, the full weight of his words crashed down. The full moon. It was less than 2 weeks away. A claiming ceremony was a sacred, binding ritual in wolf culture. Once completed under the full moon, the bond, however forced, would be nearly impossible to sever. She would be tied to Vorlin, to this place, forever. Panic threatened to rise, a black tide. She fought it down, clutching. The compound became a hive of grim preparation. The full moon was not just a celestial event, it was a deadline, ticking down in the frantic energy of the Iron Fang pack. Alara watched it all from her isolated corner, a ghost in the machine. Hilda, however, had become a reluctant source of information. The old woman's gruffness remained, but Alara sensed a shift, a flicker of something that wasn't quite sympathy, but perhaps recognition. Recognition of a fellow captive, if not in body, then in spirit. During the long hours in the kitchen, Hilda began to talk of the world outside the compound walls. She spoke of the shifting alliances among the regional packs, of a power vacuum in the north that had every alpha on edge. And she spoke, in hushed, almost mythical tones, of the Shadowmere. "The king of the northern territories," Hilda said one evening, her voice dropping as she stirred a vast pot of stew. "They say he is unlike any alpha born in 5 generations. His power is absolute, his justice swift and terrible. He has been searching for years, they say, for his fated mate, a queen to match his shadow." "What happens if he doesn't find her?" Alara asked, scraping carrots, her attention rapt. Hilda gave her a sideways glance. "Some say a king without his queen is like a sword without a hilt, all cutting edge, no control. He rules, but he is incomplete, a storm contained by will alone." She shook her head. "But that is gossip from far away. It does not concern us. Our storm is much closer." It did concern Alara. The idea of a king, a power greater than Vorlin, a justice that was swift and terrible, planted a seed of desperate hope in her heart. If such a man existed, could he be appealed to? Would he care about a single stolen girl from a rival pack? The likelihood was vanishingly small. She was a political pawn, not a princess. Yet the story lingered, a king searching for his queen. It felt like an echo of the strange pull in her own chest, a puzzle piece from a game she didn't know she was playing. Her own internal changes were becoming harder to ignore. The heat was a constant now, a comforting ember. Her senses were sharpening. She could hear conversations 3 rooms away, distinguish the scent of individual pack members as they passed her door. One morning, she looked in the small metal mirror above her sink and startled. Her gray eyes seemed lighter, almost silver at the edges, and they held a gleam that hadn't been there before. The perpetual shadow of weariness was lifting, replaced by a sharp, watchful alertness. The suppressant was leaving her system. Her wolf, whatever she was waking up. This newfound sensitivity also revealed the compound's vulnerabilities. She heard the guards complain about patrol schedules, gaps in the watch rotation during the shift change at dawn. She memorized the labyrinth of corridors between the kitchen and the least guarded side entrance, a loading dock used for supplies. A plan, fragile and fraught with risk, began to form in her mind. It wouldn't be about overpowering anyone. It would be about silence, timing, and exploiting their contempt. They saw a weak, non-shifting girl. They would not expect cunning. She needed a diversion, and she needed an ally. Hilda was the only candidate. One afternoon, as they were alone storing sacks of flour, Alara took a breath and spoke. "The full moon is in 8 days. Hilda paused, her back to Alara. "I can count, girl. I will not be here for it." The old woman turned slowly, her flinty eyes bored into Alara's. "Foolish words. These walls have held wolves 10 times stronger than you." "These walls have never held someone with nothing left to lose," Alara said, her voice steady, surprising herself. "And they've never held a sterling who's been poisoned by her own blood." Hilda's eyes widened a fraction. Poisoned? Alara told her then about the bitter morning tea, about the weakness, the delayed shift, about her father's cold calculation. As she spoke, the last of her familial loyalty evaporated, leaving only the cold, hard truth. They sold a defective product, but the defect wasn't in me, it was in the cage they built, and the cage is breaking. For a long moment, Hilda was silent. She looked at Alara not as a victim, nor as a burden, but as a phenomenon, a seed cracking through concrete. "What do you need?" Hilda finally. The night before the escape was the longest of Alara's life. Every creak of the compound, every distant shout, felt like a drumbeat counting down to her doom or her deliverance. She lay on her cot, dressed in the dark, sturdy clothes Hilda had procured for her, thick trousers, a wool sweater, and a worn but serviceable jacket. They were a servant's clothes, meant to blend into the background. Perfect. The strange heat in her chest was a steady pulse, a companion in the darkness. She focused on it, imagining it as a compass needle, pointing her toward freedom, toward a future she could not yet see. She thought of the Shadowmere King, a fleeting fantasy of a rescuer, but she shoved it aside. Her salvation would not be a man on a throne. It would be her own 2 feet carrying her away from this place. Dawn approached, a subtle graying at the high, small window of her room. This was it. She slipped from her room, a shadow among shadows. The corridor to the kitchen was empty, the compound still sleeping off the night watch. She moved with a new, predatory silence, her enhanced senses guiding her around a creaking floorboard, past the snoring guard slumped in a chair farther down the hall. Hilda was already in the kitchen, the vast room lit by the single bulb over the stove. She handed Alara a small cloth bundle. "Food, dense bread, cheese, a canteen of water. Go. Boren is snoring at his post. The delivery truck will be at the dock in 2 minutes. The door will be open." Alara clutched the bundle. Words felt inadequate. "Thank you, Hilda. I will not forget this." "Go and live, Sterling girl," Hilda said, her voice rough with emotion. "Live and make them regret the day they underestimated you." With the final nod, Alara turned and slipped through the pantry door that led to the supply corridors. The route was a maze of concrete and pipes, but she had memorized it. Her heart was a wild thing in her chest, but her mind was ice clear. She reached the final checkpoint, a grated gate that separated the living quarters from the loading area. Through the bars, she could see the hulking form of Boren, slumped in his chair, his head lolled back, a near-empty mug on the floor beside him. The deep, rattling snores were the sweetest music she'd ever heard. Beyond him, the heavy steel door to the loading bay was ajar, just a sliver. The gray light of pre-dawn peeked through. This was the moment. If he woke, if he sounded the alarm. She took a deep, silent breath, unlocked the gate, Hilda had provided the key, and slipped through, closing it softly behind her. She moved past Boren, her every sense screaming. 3 paces. 5. She reached the door. The cold morning air hit her face, carrying the smell of diesel and damp earth. Freedom. She squeezed through the opening and out into the loading bay. A large van was idling there, a man unloading trays of bread. He glanced. The interior of the car was a tomb of silent luxury. The 2 men, guards, agents, kidnappers, Ilara didn't know what to call them, said nothing. The driver navigated the decaying roads with smooth precision, soon merging onto a highway heading north, far north. Ilara sat rigidly, her mind racing. The Shadowmere King. Why would he want her? Was this some elaborate plot by Vorlin? A trick? But the men didn't smell of Ironfang. They smelled of cold stone, pine, and a clean, sharp power that was utterly alien to her. After an hour of silent driving, the one in the passenger seat, a man with sharp features and watchful eyes, spoke without turning. "You will be treated with respect. Your compliance is expected for your own safety." "Where are you taking me?" Ilara asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "To Shadowmere Keep. His Majesty has questions regarding the Sterling family and their dealings with the Ironfang." So it was political. She was a source of information, a prisoner of war in a conflict she didn't understand. The flicker of hope that he might be some kind of savior died. She was merely a pawn in a bigger game, passed from one powerful hand to another. The landscape changed as they drove. The urban sprawl in gloomy forests of the south gave way to majestic, snow-dusted mountains and vast, silent forests of evergreen. The air grew colder, clearer. This was wild, untamed country, the domain of a true apex predator. They turned off the main highway onto a private road that wound up a mountainside. The forest parted, and Ilara saw it. Shadowmere Keep was not a castle of fairy tales. It was a fortress hewn from the living rock of the mountain itself, a brutal, beautiful structure of dark stone and glittering obsidian glass that seemed to both absorb and reflect the fading afternoon light. It spoke of immense age, immense power, and an unwavering will. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. The car passed through massive iron gates that opened soundlessly and into a courtyard. The door opened, and the sharp-featured guard, Ilara heard the driver call him Lysander, offered her a hand to step out. The cold mountain air was a shock, scented with pine and frost. Wolves in dark gray uniforms moved with silent effect. The words hung in the silent hall, a declaration that changed the axis of Ilara's world. "It's you." For a long, breathless moment, they simply stared at each other. The pull in Ilara's chest was no longer a vague sensation. It was a taut, singing wire connecting her directly to the man before her. Her skin tingled. The air hummed with the frequency only the 2 of them could hear. Cassian Shadowmere, the legendary king who ruled by strength and will alone, looked shaken. The absolute control he wore like armor had a crack in it, and through that crack shone awe so profound it stole Ilara's breath. "What?" she began, her voice a thin whisper. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer with words. Slowly, as if she were made of glass, he lowered his hovering hand and instead pressed his palm flat against his own chest, over his heart. Then he pointed that same hand toward her, an unspoken question in his stormy eyes. The meaning was clear. Do you feel it? Trembling, Alara mirrored the gesture, placing her hand over the source of the warmth, the pull. The moment her palm connected, the sensation exploded. It wasn't just heat, it was a resonance, a perfect, harmonious chord struck deep within her soul. A bond, ancient and predestined, snapping into place with the force of a divine law. The fated mate bond. The myths, the stories Hilda had whispered about, they were real, and she was living one. A whirlwind of emotions tore through Alara, disbelief, terror, a wild, soaring joy, and beneath it all, a crushing sense of unworthiness. She was Alara, the runt, the servant, the sold daughter. He was a king. This had to be a mistake, a cruel trick of fate. As if reading her turmoil, Cassian's expression shifted from awe to a fierce, protective intensity. "There is no mistake," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "For 10 years I have searched, I have felt your absence like a phantom limb, and now—" He took her hand, his touch sending electric shocks up her arm. "Now I am whole." His touch, his certainty, began to melt the ice of her shock, but the practical, terrified part of her brain fought back. "My family, they sold me to Vorlin of the Iron Fang. I escaped, but they will come for me. I'm a political prisoner, a problem." "You are mine," Cassian interrupted, his voice dropping to a possessive growl that should have frightened her, but instead made the bond sing louder. "What your family did is an atrocity. What Vorlin intended is a crime against the moon itself. You are not a problem, Alara. You are the answer to my search, to the instability in these territories. You are the Queen of Shadowmere." Queen. The title was a mountain she could not climb. She pulled her hand back, wrapping her arms around herself. "You don't understand. I haven't even shifted. I'm broken. They poisoned me to keep me this way." A darkness colder than the mountain winter swept over Cassian. The air in the hall grew heavy with the promise of violence. Poisoned. The word was life in Shadowmere Keep settled into a strange, dreamlike rhythm. Alara was given spacious chambers adjoining Cassian's, a silent testament to his claim and his need to be near her. He did not press her. He was a constant, steady presence, checking on her meals, discussing the territory's politics with her as if her opinion mattered, sitting with her in comfortable silence by the fire. The antidote was a bitter, smoky-tasting draft she had to drink twice a day. Dr. Thorne monitored her closely. The effects were not immediate, but gradual. The constant, low-grade fatigue that had been her companion for years began to lift. Colors seemed brighter, sounds clearer. The world was coming into a focus she had never known. And the bond, it was a living thing between them. She could feel the echo of his moods, a flicker of irritation during a council meeting, a spike of protective fury when reports came in about Iron Fang movements, a deep, quiet contentment when they were together in the evenings. In turn, she sensed he could feel her anxiety, her moments of wonder at her new surroundings, her lingering grief over her family's betrayal. One evening, a week after her arrival, they stood together on his private balcony. The world below was a blanket of stars over black pine forests. "Can you feel her yet?" Cassian asked, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. "Your wolf?" Alara closed her eyes, focusing inward. The heat was no longer just a warmth, it was a presence, a sleeping form curled in the core of her being. She could sense its breath, the powerful beat of her heart in time with her own. "Yes," she whispered, awe filling her. She's dreaming." She's remembering what it is to be free, Cassian corrected gently. The poison forged bars around her mind. The antidote is melting them. When she wakes, she will be glorious. What if... Ilara hesitated, the old fears creeping in. What if my wolf is ordinary? Cassian turned to her, his face etched in moonlight. He cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. Ilara, look at me. She did. There is nothing ordinary about you. You survived a decade of poison. You escaped a fortified compound with nothing but wit and will. You called to me across hundreds of miles. Your wolf is the other half of my soul. She could be a field mouse, and she would still be the most magnificent creature I have ever known. His words dismantled the last of her defenses. A tear escaped, tracing a cool path down her cheek. He caught it with his thumb. The scouts have returned, he said after a moment, his tone shifting to business, though his hand remained on her face. Vorlon is furious. He's turning his territory upside down looking for you. He has no idea you are here. Yet. And my father? A cold smile touched Cassian's lips. The missive was delivered. My spies say he read it and turned the color of parchment. He has locked himself in his study. He knows the sword is hanging over his neck. He just doesn't know when it will fall. The thought of her father's fear should have brought her satisfaction. Instead, it left her hollow. What will you do to him? That, Cassian said, his gaze sharpening, is not my decision alone. It is yours. He wronged you. His punishment will be of your choosing, when you are ready. The magnitude of the power he was handing her was dizzying. He was the king, with the absolute right to dispense justice, yet he was deferring to her, not as a subject, but as an equal, as his queen. The next morning, during her antidote ritual, something changed. As the bitter liquid hit her stomach, the familiar warmth spread, but this time it didn't dissipate. It gathered, coiling tight. A sharp, sudden pain lanced through her ribs. She gasped, doubling over. Dr. Thorne, who was present, hurried forward. Your Grace. It hurts, Ilara managed, but it wasn't the pain of illness. It was the pain of growth, of something breaking out. The final barrier, the doctor said, his eyes wide with excitement rather than alarm. Your Majesty, he called toward the door. Cassian was there in an instant, having likely felt the spike of sensation through the bond. He saw her pain and his face went dark with concern. He was at her side. In the days that followed her first shift, Ilara existed in a state of glorious duality. As a human, she continued to strengthen, the pallor at poison replaced by a vibrant glow. As a wolf, she explored a new world of scent and sound and instinct. Cassian shifted often to join her, his massive black wolf a dark shadow to her silver light. They ran through the moonlit forests surrounding the keep, their bond singing through the silent trees, a harmony of power and joy that left the pack in awe. The news of her nature, an arcanine wolf, a living legend, spread through Shadowmere like a wildfire. The respect she had been afforded as the king's mate transformed into something deeper, reverence. She was not just a consort, she was a symbol of a blessed reign, a sign of the moon's favor. Ilara struggled with the weight of it. One afternoon, as she sat with Lysander reviewing maps of the southern territories, Cassian insisted she understand the political landscape. She voiced her fear. They look at me like I'm going to perform a miracle. I can barely control the glow when I get surprised. Lysander, who had thawed considerably toward her, offered a rare, small smile. Miracles are often just truths we have forgotten, Your Grace. Your presence is the miracle. It has settled something in the king that made even the strongest among us uneasy. A storm is easier to weather when you know its center is calm. She understood. Cassian, for all his control, had been a blade balanced by its point. Her arrival had given him a foundation. He was no less formidable, but the dangerous, restless edge had smoothed into a focused, lethal certainty. That certainty was directed south. Reports confirmed that Vorlin, enraged and humiliated by her escape, was making aggressive moves. He was conscripting wolves, fortifying his borders, and, most worryingly, sending out feelers to other disgruntled mid-level alphas, weaving a web of potential rebellion against the distant tyranny of the Shadowmere crown. "He's building a case," Cassian said that evening, his fingers tracing the lines of a report on his desk. He can't admit he lost a purchased bride, so he's framing it as Shadowmere aggression, stealing a member of an allied pack to destabilize the South. He's a brute, but not a fool. He's creating a conflict to draw me out, on his terms, on his land. Ilara studied the map. The Iron Fang territory was a jagged blot south of the Sterling lands. "What do we do?" "We do not play his game," Cassian said, a predatory gleam in his eye. "We play ours. The winter solstice convergence is in 3 weeks. Every alpha of significance for 1,000 miles will be there. It is held on neutral ground, by ancient treaty, a place of temporary truth." The convergence was a massive gathering for trade, diplomacy, and displaying pack strength. "You want to go." "I want us to go," he corrected, looking at her. "You and I. We will arrive not as a king hunting a war, but as a royal couple taking our rightful place in the wider world. We will show them the strength of our bond. We will show them you. Let Vorlin rant about a stolen breeder. The world will see a queen he could never hope to touch." The plan was bold. It was dangerous. It placed her, the most precious thing in his world, squarely in the public eye, potentially within reach of her enemies. But she saw the wisdom in it. A direct attack would validate Vorlin's narrative. This was a declaration, a display of power so absolute it might dismantle Vorlin's alliances before they were fully formed. "They will all be there," Ilara said quietly. "My father, Serena, and Mira." Cassian's gaze softened. He came around the desk and took her hands. "Yes, they will see you. They will see what they tried to destroy, shining brighter than they could ever imagine. It will be your stage, Ilara, your decision. Do you wish to face them?" Did she? The thought sent a chill through her, followed by that new, steady warmth from her wolf. "Yes," the wolf whispered. "Let them see." "I do," Ilara said, her voice gaining strength. "I want to look my father in the eye. I want him to understand exactly what he sold." Cassian nodded, pride burning in his stormy eyes. "Then we will make sure he sees nothing else." The keep shifted into a new kind of preparation, not for war, but for theater. The most skilled tailors from the northern cities were summoned. Cassian was involved in every detail, rejecting designs he deemed insufficiently regal or too vulnerable. He settled on a concept that made Ilara's breath catch. "Silver and shadow," Cassian told the head tailor. "Fabric that moves like smoke and catches the light like chainmail. She is the moon, I am the night. Make the world understand." As the tailor took her measurements, Ilara felt a thrilling, terrifying sense of anticipation. The solstice convergence would be her debut, not as Ilara the servant or Ilara the captive, but as Ilara Shadowmere, the Arcanine queen. The storm Cassian had promised was coming, but they would not be running from it. They would be riding at its very heart, and they would let its thunder be their proclamation to the world. The journey to the convergence site was a procession of deliberate power. They did not travel by car, but in a convoy of rugged, luxurious vehicles fit for mountain roads, flanked by a contingent of Cassian's most elite guards. Ilara watched the landscape change from Cassian's stark, beautiful mountains to the rolling, forested hills of the neutral territories. Her wolf was restless inside her, a silver tide responding to the nearing presence of so many alphas, so much gathered power. Cassian, sitting beside her, was a pillar of calm, but she could feel the focused intensity thrumming through the bond. He was entering a field of potential enemies, with his most precious vulnerability at his side. His every sense was on high alert. The convergence was held in a vast natural amphitheater surrounded by ancient standing stones. A temporary city of pavilions and tents had sprung up, each flying the banners of different packs. The air was thick with the smells of cooking fires, horses, and hundreds of wolves. It was overwhelming. Their arrival did not go unnoticed. A hush fell over the sections nearest the entrance as the Châteauneuf vehicles pulled into the designated royal compound, a prime area reserved for the most powerful packs. Guards in gray uniforms swiftly erected their pavilion, a structure of dark fabric and silver accents that stood out starkly against the more colorful tents around it. Ilaris stepped out of the vehicle, taking Cassian's offered hand. She was dressed in traveling clothes of fine, dark wool, her silver hair braided simply. It was an understated entrance, but all eyes were on them. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. The Shadowmere. Is that her, the mate? They say she's an Arcanine. She looks so young. Cassian ignored them all, his posture radiating a "don't look too long" warning. He guided Alara into the privacy of their pavilion. The interior was spacious, divided into rooms by rich hangings. It was a piece of the keep transplanted. "Rest," he told her. "The formal opening is tonight. That is when we make our entrance." Ilara couldn't rest. Nerves buzzed under her skin. She walked to the entrance of the pavilion and peered out through a gap in the flaps. She watched the sea of wolves, recognizing banners from her childhood lessons, and then she saw it. The sterling crest, a silver oak tree on a field of green. Her father's tent was modest, positioned far from the royal compound, a clear indicator of his fallen status. Seeing it sent a jolt through her system. Anger, grief, and a cold, hard resolve. Her wolf growled softly in her mind. Soon, she promised it. As dusk fell, she prepared for the night. The dress Cassian had commissioned was a masterpiece. The gown was layers of sheer charcoal gray chiffon over a sheath of metallic silver silk that clung to her form. It seemed to drink the light and then emit a soft moon-like glow of its own. It was both armor and declaration. Her hair was left down, a cascade of silver white over her shoulders, a crown in itself. When she emerged from the dressing area, Cassian, who was wearing a formal tunic of black embroidered with silver thread, went utterly still. His stormy eyes darkened with awe, and the night unfolded like a carefully scripted play. Ilara and Cassian took their seats at the high table, a place of honor that overlooked the entire gathering. Whispers followed them, a constant hum of speculation and awe. Delegations from other major packs came to pay their respects, their curiosity about Ilara barely masked. She handled them with a grace that felt both foreign and innate, her wolf's ancient wisdom guiding her responses, her bond with Cassian giving her an unshakable confidence. She was aware of her family's presence like a throbbing toothache at the edge of her consciousness. They did not approach. They lingered on the fringes, shadows at the feast. It was during a lull, as Cassian was engaged in a deep discussion with the alpha of the coastal reach, that a server approached Ilara. He was a young wolf with nervous eyes, carrying a tray of crystal goblets filled with sparkling wine. "A refreshment for the queen," he murmured, bowing his head too low. Something prickled at the back of Ilara's neck. Not a scent, not a sound, a feeling. The bond, which had been a contented hum, gave a faint, discordant twang. Her wolf lifted its head inside her, mercury eyes sharp. Ilara looked at the proffered goblet. It looked identical to the others on the tray, but the server's hand trembled slightly, and his scent, beneath the soap and the wine, there was a faint, acrid note of fear sweat. "Thank you," she said, her voice cool. She didn't reach for it. "Please, set it there." She indicated the table. The server's eyes flickered. It is best chilled, Your Grace." "It will be fine," she said, her gaze holding his. She pushed gently with her will. Not an alpha command, but the subtle pressure of the arcanine, a probing light. The server's resolve shattered. He paled, set the goblet down with a clatter that drew a few glances, and scurried away, disappearing into the crowd. Ilaric's heart beat a little faster. She looked at the goblet. Cassian, though still speaking, had shifted his posture minutely, his hand coming to rest on her lower back. He had felt her alarm through the bond. A moment later, Lysander materialized silently beside the table. Cassian gave an almost imperceptible nod. Lysander's eyes tracked the fleeing server's path, and he melted away after him. Cassian leaned close, his lips brushing her ear. "What is it?" she whispered back. "The wine." It felt wrong. His eyes turned to chips of glacial ice. He didn't question her instinct. He signaled another guard who discreetly removed the goblet. The evening proceeded, but the undercurrent had changed. The attempted poisoning, if that's what it was a brazen, stupid move. Too public, too easily traced, which meant it was either a desperate gambit or a distraction. An hour later, Lysander returned. He leaned between them, his voice a bare whisper. The server was a low-level Iron Fang wolf planted in the catering staff weeks ago. He confessed under minimal pressure. The poison was a mild sedative, not lethal, meant to make the queen drowsy, disoriented, possibly to discredit her or to set her up for a staged accident later. Cassian's jaw tightened. Vorlin's work. Clumsy. He's panicking. Or he wants you to think he's panicking, Ilara said quietly. Both men looked at her. He knows he can't touch me here, not directly, but an accident. If I were to wander off, confused, and fall from a cliff, it would be a tragedy, not an act of war, and it would break you. She looked at Cassian, seeing the horror of that scenario flash in his eyes. He will not get the chance, Cassian vowed, his voice deadly soft. He's already gotten his chance, Ilara corrected, a strange calm settling over her. The attack had shaken her, but it had also clarified everything. He's shown his hand. He's here, or his agents are, and he's desperate enough to try this in a hall full of witnesses. She looked out over the crowd, her senses expanding. This isn't the main play. This is the feint. He wants our eyes here, on the poison, on the security around me. Then where does he want us looking away from? Lysander mused. The answer came not from them, but from a commotion at the far end of the pavilion. Shouts, the sound of a table overturning, a wave of agitation moved through the crowd. A messenger, covered in road dust and bleeding from a cut on his forehead, staggered into the light, his chest heaving. He wore the colors of the Sterling pack. "King Shadowmere," the messenger gasped, falling to his knees. "I come from Silver Creek territory. We are under attack. Iron Fang wolves, dozens of them. They're burning the outlying farms, targeting the pack house. Alpha Alaric, he sent me. He begs for the king's aid. He says they are looking for something. For her." The pavilion erupted in chaos. Alaric Sterling pushed his way forward, his face a mask. Alaric Sterling was held under guard in a secure tent within the Shadowmere compound, stripped of his title for the duration of the proceedings. The Convergence, meanwhile, was in an uproar. Cassian's shocking arrest of another alpha on neutral ground was unprecedented. Some cried tyranny. Others, who had heard the whispers of poison in seeing the Sterling family's collapse, watched with grim satisfaction. Cassian was immovable. He convened a closed session of the oldest, most respected alphas present, a makeshift council of elders. Ilara was by his side. He presented the evidence, the testimony of Shadowmere scouts who had long monitored the Iron Fang, the medical report from Dr. Thorne detailing a decade of poisoning, the sworn account of Hilda, who had been secretly extracted from the Iron Fang compound regarding Ilara's sale in captivity. The evidence was damning. The elders, men and women of hardened wisdom, looked at Ilara with new eyes, not as a young queen, but as a survivor of a profound betrayal. The political calculus shifted. Supporting Cassian was no longer about fearing his power, it was about condemning a rot that threatened the very foundations of their society. By the following evening, the council had reached a verdict. Alaric Sterling was found guilty of crimes against his own blood and against the wider laws of pack and kinship. His fate, however, they formally placed in the hands of the wronged party, Queen Alara. She stood before the council, Cassian a solid presence behind her chair. "What is your will, your grace?" asks the eldest alpha, a woman with hair like snow and eyes like flint. All eyes were on her. This was the moment. She could demand his execution, she could demand his imprisonment, she could banish him to a life of torment as a rogue. Alara thought of the little girl who had yearned for a father's smile. She thought of the bitter tea, the cold shoulders, the final crushing betrayal. She thought of the woman she had become, not in spite of him, but because she had risen from the ashes of his cruelty. "Alaric Sterling sought to make me invisible," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the quiet tent. "He sought to erase my power, my voice, my very self. The greatest punishment, therefore, is not to make him invisible in turn. It is to make him see." She outlined her judgment. Alaric Sterling would be stripped of his alpha title permanently. The Sterling pack would be placed under the stewardship of a neighboring honorable alpha appointed by the council until a new leader could be chosen from within their ranks. Alaric himself would not be imprisoned in a dungeon. "He will serve," she declared. "He will spend the rest of his days in service to the community he failed. He will work in the healing halls, tending to the sick and injured. He will clean the rooms, change the linens, empty the bedpans. He will do the work he deemed beneath a Sterling, the work he forced upon me. And every day he will be reminded that the daughter he tried to destroy now holds the power to grant him this mercy instead of the death he deserves." The judgment was breathtaking in its psychological cruelty and its profound justice. It stripped him of everything he valued, status, power, pride, and forced him to live in the world he had created for her. The council approved it unanimously. Alaric was brought before Alara to hear his sentence. He looked broken, old, his arrogance completely gone. When the terms were read, he didn't protest. He simply looked at his daughter, and in his eyes she saw not just defeat, but a dawning, horrible understanding of the magnitude of his loss. He had not just sold a daughter, he had sold a queen, and with her, his own soul. "As for my sisters," Alara said, her gaze cool, "your father followed your lead. They will share your fate. They will work alongside you, a family, united in service, as we never were in love." Serena and Mira, who had been dragged in weeping, collapsed into silent shock. Their dreams of finery and status were over. They were sentenced to the same life of humble labor. It was done. The Sterling name, once proud, now a byword of betrayal, its legacy one of cleansing service. As the guards led her broken family away, Cassian took Alara's hand. "A merciful sentence," he murmured, "more than they deserved." "Mercy would have been letting them go," Alara replied, her mercury eyes glinting. "This is justice, and it will haunt them longer than any prison cell." The matter of the Sterlings was closed, but the larger threat still loomed. Vorlin had been thwarted, his pawn captured, his plot exposed, but a cornered beast was at its most dangerous. With the Sterling drama resolved, the convergence lost its chaotic energy. The focus shifted back to trade and diplomacy, but beneath the surface a new tension hummed. The Shadowmere king had demonstrated ruthless efficiency and a shocking deference to his queen's justice. Alliances were quietly recalibrated. No one wanted to be on the wrong side of a power couple that combined Cassian's strategic brilliance with Alara's legendary moral authority. Cassian, however, was not relaxing. The failed poisoning and the crude attack on Sterling lands confirmed that Vorlin was unhinged by failure. A rational enemy would cut his losses. A proud, brutal one would seek a dramatic, personal victory. "He will challenge me," Cassian said to Alara and his inner circle in their pavilion. Formally, for the right to you. It's the oldest law, the basest one. He'll claim prior claim through purchase and demand a duel to settle it. Lysander frowned. He cannot seriously believe the council would sanction such a barbaric practice over a proven fated mate bond. He doesn't need their sanction, Alara said quietly. They all looked at her. He needs an audience. If he issues a public challenge here at the Convergence and Cassian refuses, or if I refuse to be fought over, Vorlon can spin it as cowardice, as the mighty Shadowmere fearing a lesser alpha. It undermines your authority, Cassian. It sows doubt. And for a man like Vorlon, that's a victory. He loses either way in a fight, but in the court of opinion, he might win. Cassian stared at her with fierce pride. You see the battlefield perfectly, he nodded, which is why we will not give him the choice of narrative. If he challenges, I accept. Sire, Lysander began, concerned. But, Cassian continued, his gaze locked on Alara, the queen is not a trophy to be won. She is a sovereign in her own right. Therefore, the challenge is not for her. It is for the right to continue breathing after threatening what is mine. A duel to the death. No quarter, no surrender. The room was silent. It was a brutal escalation, turning Vorlon's political ploy into a simple execution. He may back down, Alara said. Cassian's smile was cold. He won't. His pride is now a noose, and he will put his own head in it. The prediction proved correct. The very next day, as the Convergence was packing up, Vorlon of the Iron Fang made his move. He didn't request a formal audience. He staged a scene in the main clearing, surrounded by his remaining lieutenants and a crowd of onlookers. Shadowmere, Vorlon bellowed, his voice raw with fury. You skulk in your tent with stolen property. I paid for the Sterling girl, a legal transaction. You have no right. I demand satisfaction. I challenge you for what is mine by law. A sickened murmur ran through the crowd. It was as crude and ugly as they had anticipated. Cassian emerged from his pavilion, Alara beside him. They looked like calm monarchs confronting a rabid dog. You speak of laws, Vorlon, Cassian said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. The only law you've invoked is the law of the gutter. You trafficked a female. You attempted to poison a queen. You attacked neutral lands as a diversion. You have no standing to demand anything. Vorlon's face purpled. Are you a coward, Shadowmere, hiding behind technicalities, afraid to fight for your woman? Cassian didn't rise to the taunt. He stepped forward, his power unfurling, a dark, chilling wave that made the nearest wolves step back. I am afraid of nothing, least of all you, but the queen is not a piece to be gambled. She is my mate, my equal, my heart. You have threatened my heart. For that, there is only one answer. He drew himself to his full height, his gray eyes burning with lethal intent. I accept your challenge, Vorlon, not for a prize, but for your life. A duel. Here, now, to the death. The clearing went dead silent. This was beyond a political duel. This was an annihilation. Vorlon hesitated. For a second, Alara saw the brute calculation in his eyes, the fear of Cassian's legendary skill, warring with the impossibility of backing down now. His pack was watching. The whole world was watching. The noose was tight. With a roar of sheer rage, Vorlon ripped his tunic aside. So be it, to the death. The crowd scrambled back, forming a wide circle on the grassy field. The elders were summoned to oversee and ensure no outside interference. Cassian turned to Alara. He didn't speak. He simply took her face in his hands and kissed her, deeply, possessively, a promise and a goodbye, all in one. The bonds between them flared, bright and fierce. "Come back to me," she whispered against his lips, her voice fierce. "I always will." He stepped into the circle, shrugging off his own jacket. The two alphas faced each other, one a mountain of scarred fury, the other a blade of focused night. There was no ceremony. Vorlon shifted first, his wolf a monstrous, ragged-furred beast of muddy brown, slavering with rage. Cassian's shift was a silent explosion of darkness, his wolf a giant of pure shadow and sharp angles, eyes like cold stars. The fight was not long. Vorlon was strong, vicious, and fought with the desperation of a cornered animal. He charged, bit, clawed with wild abandon. But Cassian was a master. He moved with a terrifying economy, evading the clumsy attacks, his counters precise and devastating. He was not just fighting, he was dissecting. Ilara watched, her heart in her throat, her wolf bristling inside her, wanting to join, to protect, but she held still. This was Cassian's fight, for her. Finally, Cassian saw his opening. As Vorlon lunged, overextended, Cassian's black wolf spun and clamped his powerful jaws on the brute's throat. There was a terrible crunch, a gurgled whine, and then silence. Vorlon's massive form went limp. The Iron Fang Alpha was dead. Cassian released him, backing away, his muzzle stained. He shifted back to human form, breathing heavily, a few shallow cuts on his arms and chest, the only marks of the battle. He looked first at the elders, who gave a solemn nod of confirmation. Then he turned his eyes to Ilara. He walked to her, through the silent, awestruck crowd. He was a conqueror, a king, a killer. But when he reached her, he simply took her hand and brought it to his lips, his eyes asking a silent question. She answered by stepping forward and into his arms, ignoring the blood, feeling only the solid, living beat of his heart against hers. The bond sang a song of victory and peace. The message was sent in the most primal way possible. The return to Shadowmere Keep was a triumphant procession. News of Cassian's decisive victory and the shocking fall of the Sterling family had raced ahead of them. The pack lined the road to the fortress, their howls a cacophony of joy and allegiance that shook the mountain peaks. They weren't just celebrating their king's strength, they were celebrating the queen whose presence had made him invincible. Ilara watched it all from the car window, Cassian's hand firmly wrapped around hers. The reality of it was still settling. Vorlon was dead. Her father was a broken man in a healer's apron. Her sisters were scrubbing floors. The nightmares that had defined her life were over. But a new reality was beginning. She was no longer just Cassian's mate, a surprising addition to the court. She was the Arcanine queen who had dispensed legendary justice. She was a symbol, and symbols have duties. A formal coronation was planned, not for Cassian, but for her, a public, binding ritual to officially install her as co-ruler of Shadowmere. The keep buzzed with preparations even more elaborate than those for the convergence. Ilara found the attention overwhelming. One afternoon, she escaped to the high battlements, seeking the cold, clean wind. She found Cassian already there, gazing out over his domain. "They want a fairy tale," she said, joining him at the stone rail. "A perfect queen from a perfect legend. I'm just a girl who got lucky." Cassian shook his head, a smile touching his lips. "Luck had nothing to do with it. Fate brought us together. Your strength kept you alive until it could. There is no just about you, Ilara." He turned to face her, the wind tugging at his dark hair. "A queen is not born in a crown. She is forged in fire. You have been through the fire. The crown is simply an acknowledgement of the metal that remains." His words, as always, steadied her. What if I make a mistake? What if I'm not good at this? Then we will fix it together. You are not alone on that throne, Alara. You have me. You have Lysander, Dr. Thorne, Hilda. You have a pack that would die for you. We are your strength as you are ours. The coronation day dawned clear and bitterly cold, the sky a brilliant, hard blue. The great hall of the keep was filled to capacity with pack members and honored guests from allied territories. The air smelled of pine boughs, incense, and anticipation. Alara was dressed in a gown that was the culmination of the tailor's art. It was an interplay of her themes. The bodice was fashioned like intricate silver armor, while the skirt flowed into layers of sheer, midnight blue silk that seemed to hold the night sky within them. A cloak of white wolf fur, a gift from the elders, was fastened at her shoulders. Her silver hair was unbound, a mark of her unique lineage. Cassian waited for her at the foot of the dais, dressed in his formal black and silver. His eyes held a love so profound it made her breath catch. The ceremony was ancient, solemn. The head elder, the same woman from the council, placed a delicate circlet of silver and obsidian on Alara's brow. It was light, but its weight was the weight of history. Do you, Alara of the Arcanine line, swear to guard the hearts and homes of Shadowmere, to lead with wisdom, to judge with mercy, and to stand as the moon to your king's night? Alara's voice did not waver. I swear it. Then, by the laws of moon and mountain, we name you Queen Alara Shadowmere, light of the north, mate to the king, sovereign of this realm. The hall erupted, not just in cheers, but in howls, a rising, harmonious song of wolf voices that celebrated their new queen. Cassian took her hand and led her up the steps to the twin thrones that now sat on the dais, one of dark stone, one newly forged of silver-adorned marble. As they sat, side by side, looking out over their people, Alara felt the final piece of her old self settle into peace. The servant girl was gone. The captive was free. The victim had become the judge. She was home. Later, in the quiet of their chambers after the feasting had ended, Cassian held her close by the fire. Happy? He murmured into her hair. More than I ever thought possible, she whispered back. She traced the line of his jaw. It feels complete, but also like a beginning. It is, he said. The threats are gone. The throne is secure. Now we get to build, together. The kind of legacy we want. A legacy of strength, yes, but also of justice, of compassion. The kind of rule that makes the Sterling's betrayal a forgotten nightmare, and our bond the story that defines an era. Alara smiled, leaning into him. She thought of Hilda, now head of the keep's kitchens, treated with respect. She thought of the new laws being drafted to protect late bloomers and the unranked. She thought of the scouts reporting that the Iron Fang pack, leaderless, was fragmenting. Its members offered a chance to swear new oaths or leave in peace. They had not just won a war, they were planting the seeds of a lasting peace. Her wolf sighed contentedly within her, a silver light glowing softly against Cassian's chest. The storm had passed, the night was clear, and in the vast, quiet darkness, the moon and the shadow reigned together forever. The great hall of Shadowmere Keep, once a place of intimidating silence and stern judgment, was now filled with the warm, chaotic music of laughter and chatter. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, painting diamonds of light on the stone floor where two small, tumbling shadows played. 5 years had not softened the formidable power of King Cassian Shadowmere, but it had gentled the lines around his eyes. He stood by the hearth, not on the dais, a contented smile playing on his lips as he watched the scene. In the center of the room, on a thick, sun-warmed rug, sat Queen Ilara. No crown rested on her silver hair today, only a simple braid. Her legendary mercury eyes, capable of seeing into the soul of a kingdom, were instead crinkled with unrestrained joy. She was encircled by her greatest treasures. Twin boys, just past their 4th birthday, were a whirlwind of energy. Kale, with his father's dark, unruly hair and serious gray eyes, was diligently trying to build a tower of wooden blocks, his little tongue poking out in concentration. His brother, Finn, was a miniature echo of Ilara, his hair a brighter silver, his eyes a luminous, cheerful blue. He was the architect of chaos, gleefully helping by handing Kale the most lopsided blocks he could find. "Finn, that one is a roof piece," Kale said with a patience beyond his years, sounding remarkably like Lysander. "It's a sparkly roof," Finn declared, plopping it on top. The tower wobbled precariously. Ilara laughed, the sound bright and clear, and reached out to steady the construction. "A very creative, sparkly roof, my love, but perhaps we need a stronger base." She guided Finn's hand to a sturdier block. This was their legacy, not just the peace treaties and the prosperous villages, not the respected alliances or the reformed laws, though those were all thriving. Their truest legacy was this: a home filled with light, safety, and the unshakable certainty of love. The door opened and Hilda entered, no longer just the cook, but the revered matron of the royal household. She carried a tray of honey cakes, their scent filling the air. The boys' heads snapped up in unison. "Nana Hilda!" they chorused, abandoning the tower to scramble toward her. "There now, my little wolves," Hilda chuckled, her flinty eyes soft as she handed them each a cake. "Mind the crumbs." She caught Ilara's eye and gave a warm, knowing nod. The woman who had helped a desperate girl escape a concrete prison now helped raise the princes of the realm. It was a poetic justice that brought Ilara peace every day. Cassian came to sit beside Ilara on the rug, his large frame making the twins seem even smaller. Finn immediately climbed into his lap, smearing honey on his father's tunic. Cassian didn't flinch. He just wrapped an arm around his son, his gaze meeting Ilara's over their children's heads. The bond between them, after all these years, was not a roaring fire, but a deep, steady hearth, constant, warming, the center of their world. "A messenger came from the south, from Alpha Gideon," Cassian said quietly, so only she could hear. Ilara felt no dread, only mild curiosity. The South was no longer a place of nightmares. "He reports that the Sterling Healing Hall is the most efficient in the region," Cassian continued, with a hint of dry amusement in his voice. "The head healer praises the focus of his senior orderly. It seems Alaric has found a calling in meticulous cleanliness." Ilara pictured her father not as a terrifying alpha, but as an old man in a healer's smock, finding a strange, quiet purpose in the order of a sick room. The last of the icy shard in her heart, the one that remembered the taste of bitter tea, finally melted. There was no hate left, only a distant, faded pity. He was a lesson, not a ghost. "And the archives?" she asked. "Serena has single-handedly restored a collection of historical scrolls, thought to be lost. The scholars are petitioning to have her granted a title of Keeper. Mira," I added, "has stopped complaining. Gideon says she has taken charge of the hall's gardens. Apparently she has a gift for making things grow." Ilara absorbed this. Her sisters, who valued only glitter and status, were now finding their worth in preservation and creation. They had been given not just a punishment, but a path to a different life, a better one. The justice she had chosen had in its own way healed them too. Finn, finished with his cake, yawned hugely and curled into Cassian's chest. Kale, ever observant, retrieved his favorite blanket and brought it to his brother. The simple, caring act made Alara's heart swell. "They're perfect," she whispered, her eyes glistening with happy tears. "They are," Cassian agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "Because they're ours, because they are loved. They will never know a day of fear or doubt. That is our victory, Alara, not the duels or the decrees. This." That evening, after the boys were tucked into bed, their room adorned with carved wooden wolves and star charts, Alara and Cassian walked the high battlements. The kingdom below was a tapestry of peaceful lights under a sky ablaze with stars. The silence was companionable, filled with the echo of their children's laughter and the promise of 1,000 calm tomorrows. "Do you remember when you found me at that bus shelter? I thought my life was over." Cassian turned and wrapped her in his arms, his chin resting on her head. "I remember thinking my life was finally beginning. I had a kingdom, but I was living in a monochrome world. You brought the color. You brought the light." He pulled back slightly to look at her, his stormy eyes soft in the moonlight. "They tell our story out there, you know, in the villages. They call it the tale of the lost queen. They talk about the betrayal, the rescue, the great duel, but they always end it the same way." "How do they end it?" she asked, smiling. "They say the Shadow King and his Arcanine Queen ruled not with an iron fist, but with open hands, that they built a kingdom where the weak were protected and the strong served, and that they lived, surrounded by love and laughter, in the fortress on the mountain for all their long and blessed days." Alara's heart felt so full, she thought it might shine as brightly as her wolf. "That's a good ending," she whispered. "It's not an ending, my love," Cassian said, kissing her forehead, then her lips. "We have a lifetime of todays ahead." From the nursery deep within the keep, a sound drifted up on the cold, clean air, not a cry, but a contented, sleepy sigh of a child safe in his dreams. Then another, a soft echo. Below, a wolf howled, a long, joyful note that celebrated the peace of the pack. It was answered by another, and another, until the night song wrapped around the mountain like a lullaby. Hand in hand, the king and queen looked out over their world, a world they had fought for, healed, and built together. The past was a closed book. The future was a sunrise waiting over the peaks. And the present, this perfect, peaceful moment, was a happy ending that was really just a beautiful, unending beginning. They turned and walked inside, to the warmth of their hearth and the quiet, perfect joy of their forever.